Welcome everyone. Welcome to this our Book and Biscotti events. Please note that this event is being recorded and will be available on social media, so please remain muted during the entire event to improve the quality so to minimize background noise. And at this time, I will ask you to turn off your video to maximize the quality of the recording, except for our speakers. Only the readers and hosts will have the video on. If you need to maximize your viewing, click on the speaker view at the top of the hand corner.
Benvenuti a tutti e grazie per essere qui. Si noti che questo evento verrà registrato e sarà disponibile sui social media. Si prega di rimanere in modalità silenziosa per tutta la durata dell'evento. In questo momento vi chiediamo di spegnere il vostro video per massimizzare la qualità della registrazione. Solo i lettori e gli host avranno il video attivo. Per massimizzare la visualizzazione cliccate su Speaker View in alto a destra. Grazie.
Okay, thank you for joining us today. The Association of Italian Canadian Writers is pleased to present the Book and Biscotti Literacy Series Open Mic. My name is Annalisa Panati, and I'm pleased to co-host the 5th Zoom Book and Biscotti with Maria Pia Spadafora, and technical host is Licia Canton. If you missed the events held in September, October, November, December, and January, you can watch them on YouTube at AICW Canada. I recognize that we all are on different territories at this time, but I want to take a moment to acknowledge that I am located on unceded indigenous land. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodian of the land and waters on which I am today. And Tiohtià:ke Montreal is historically known as gathering place for many First Nations. The Association of Italian Canadian Writers acknowledge them and other nations who care for the land across our country, recorded and unrecorded, and we pay our respect to Canadian first storytellers. Today, we will listen to 8 distinguished writers, all members of AICW. Gianna Patriarca from Toronto, Michelle Alfano, also from Toronto. Then we'll have Joseph Pivato from Edmonton, Caterina Edwards from Edmonton. We will have a little pause for announcement at that time, and then we will continue with Carmelinda Scian from Toronto, Delia De Santis from Sarnia, Darlene Madott, who join us today from Toronto, and Marisa De Franceschi from Windsor.
A reminder to please remain muted during the entire event and to turn off your video. Vi ricordiamo di rimanere in modalità silenziosa per tutta la durata dell'evento e di spegnere il vostro video. Grazie. I'd like to begin the session with Gianna Patriarca, who is from Toronto. Welcome, Gianna.
The first poem is, this book, To the Men Who Write Goodbye Letters, is a book about it took me 3 years to write, and it's about loss. But I didn't want to look at loss in an analytical and academic way. I wanted to give it the poetry that it often does not get. So it's a book about loss, but it's not without hope. The first poem is called Die, so I can write about it. I don't recall who wrote the line. Some poet, an important one perhaps. I forget a lot of things lately. It makes it easier now to forgive. You left for a good reason, I think, I hope. Maybe you needed a first kill to write. Was I too loud, too fat, too awkward? My voice too clear, it frightened you. You needed to be the clever one, creative, ingenious, living your happiness as a myth, a parable? Was I too foreign? You wanted a piece of me to complete your heart, but I hadn't been murdered yet. You danced me to the stairwell. I lacked grace, I stumbled. Was it your hand that pushed me, that held me down, sunlight on a tired body, a vacancy, light enough to dispose? We wander backwards towards our sins, surveying. We find only the grief, the guilt in all the hollow spaces. I lost my mom 3 years ago, and with it, I lost the language. With the loss of my mother, I lost my language. When my mother died, so did our language, the one we spoke each day at the kitchen table, each night by the hum of the television, on the telephone between visits, the language that dropped from the open window above her garden while she pruned and tied and watered. It was an old language, perfect for the prayers she whispered and the songs she sang. It lived between us like the child we both loved. Now I must slide my fingers over this miracle of technology to hear her voice. This new world has no need for old languages. But while I am here, I will hold it safe in the limbo of my gut. I also tend to translate into Italian my own work, and this is in Italian for my mother. Lingua. Quando è morta mamma, è morta anche la nostra lingua, quella che parlavamo ogni giorno insieme, ogni giorno al tavolo, in cucina, ogni sera sotto il rumore della televisione, al telefono, quella lingua che scappava dalla finestra e arrivava in giardino mentre piantava, allacciava, annaffiava. Era una vecchia lingua, perfetta per le preghiere che recitava e le canzoni che cantava. Una lingua che viveva fra noi come quella bimba che amiamo. Ora devo scivolare le dita su questo miracolo di tecnologia per sentire la sua voce. Questo nuovo mondo non ha bisogno di vecchie lingue, ma mentre sono qui la tengo sicura nel limbo del mio ventre. I lost a lot of friends this past year, a couple to suicide. And anyway, pure luck. This one's for Anthony. He believed it was all just luck. Maybe it was. Some people are magnets, and unexplained energy, a charisma that ignites. But it might have been a weak force, a wrong connection, or that self-love missing. Who knows where it all comes from? The need to bite into life and have all the flavors hold you hostage until the luck runs out. And I will leave you with a poem. Locking the door. Eliot misunderstood April. January is the cruelest month. Mama chose the coldest to be beside Papa's bones forever. Trees have stripped for winter, leaving birds homeless. Only plastic wreaths are propped on stone markers, bouquets that never die, always in full bloom. I am left to empty my mother's house of all the years, the language, the history. I must take down all the Christs she'd hung with devotion, leave the walls clean for other pieties. I must lock the door one last time. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Gianna. That was so touching and powerful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're gonna move on to Michelle Alfano, a writer from Toronto. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. I'm going to read a chapter from some new work called Julia at the Wedding. And this chapter is called Theodore Tyson Ty. Theodore, the narrator, is addressing Julia, the daughter of his best friend. Julia is a specter who has appeared at the wedding of her parents some 20 years before. And this is told in Theodore's voice. My mother played a dirty on me to try and get my dad to come back to us after he left her. They had a huge fight after he came home and found her drunk. He threw some clothes into a suitcase and just left. He didn't even say bye to me. When I came home, he had already left. She found out where he was living with another woman. It turned out that it wasn't far from where my mom and I lived. She made me go on my birthday in April and remind him of that. She wanted me to beg him to come back. I said, no, I won't do that. I screamed and hollered and stomped around the house, but she wouldn't let up. Just one time, Theo. He'll listen to you. Don't you want your dad back? No, I don't. I ran into my room and slammed the door, but it didn't have a lock and I couldn't keep her out. All that night, she sat on my bed and cried and begged me to speak to him. She was drunk and slobbering and she wouldn't leave me alone. I placed my pillow around my head to block out her voice, but didn't help one little bit. Just once, please, just once, she pleaded. Fine, I yelled. Now leave me alone, I'll do it. The next day, my actual birthday, she drove me to the apartment he was living in with some woman I didn't know. She pushed me towards the entrance to the apartment. I followed the hallway down to his apartment door and knocked on it. I remember I wasn't tall enough to even reach the knocker. I never actually saw the woman, but I smelled her perfume and I saw her stuff lying around the apartment through the doorway when he opened the door. My dad was in his shorts and a white t-shirt. He jumped a bit when he saw me, like I was some kind of ghost or something. What the hell are you doing here, he said, rubbing his eyes and scratching his head like he just woke up. It's my birthday, Dad, I began. He seemed confused, then embarrassed, then slowly getting angry. Was he angry with me, with my mom? You remember, right? I said, prodding him a bit. My mom had coached me as to what to say to him. Of course I do, son, of course I do, he said. And then he stopped like he didn't know what else to say. Mom says you have to come home because it's my birthday. Theo, I don't live there anymore, son, you know that, but that doesn't mean I'm not your dad. That he thought he could be my father and live with that woman and leave us alone made me so angry I could spit. Sure it does, I snapped, even though I had no intention of yelling at him. You're a creep and a jerk. I raised my small fists and battered him in the stomach, like one of those tiny dogs that don't even know that they are tiny and go after bigger dogs. He held me off with one long tattooed arm. I remember it had a big heart on it, and small as it was, I thought, what the hell do you know about love? Slow down, Theo, slow down. I'll come by next week and I'll take you out, okay? We'll go to that burger place you like down the street and play some video games at the house. I just can't do it today. Sure, I know it was your birthday. Sure, I did. I just can't do it today. You're a liar, I screamed. I ran down the hallway of the apartment and kicked a few doors for good measure. And if you don't come now, don't come at all. That was another thing my mom told me to say. Theo, he yelled after me. But he didn't leave the apartment to follow me. He stood in the hallway in his shorts and just stared at me running. I ran out of the building and stormed towards the car where my mom was waiting, biting her bitten down nails furiously chewing on some gum, the kind you chew when you want to give up smoking. What did he say, Theo? What did he say? Don't call me that, I yelled at her. Don't call me that again. I got in the car and slammed the door. I refused to talk to her the rest of the way home. He never did show up the next day, and that's about the time I asked everyone to start calling me Tyson. I thought it sounded like a tough name, and I liked that. It was also about the time when she started hitting me, but I was too embarrassed to tell anyone except your dad about it, Julia. Poor guy, he looked so shocked and hurt and upset, and there wasn't a darn thing he could do to help me. I made him promise he wouldn't tell his mom or anyone else. She would drink too much and start grabbing me by the face and telling me long, boring stories of her sorry life, how she was always the smart, pretty girl with a great future, until she met my dad, and he ruined her, blah, blah, blah. She was going to nursing school, and she had great marks on top of the class. She was smarter than any of her sisters. Then she met my dad, and he got her pregnant. She said it like it was something she didn't have a part in. She dropped out of college and had me. She made me feel like that part was my fault too. Then she felt too proud to get a job that wasn't in her field, like working in a clothing store or a bank, and she stayed home with me until I went to school. When I started kindergarten, there was no reason for her to stay home, but she had lost her confidence and her look, she said. Then she started drinking, and my dad, who was never really reliable to begin with, hooked up with this other woman and pretty much disappeared. I heard they had a little boy, and that was the end of that. And I hope to hell they didn't call that little kid Theodore too. And she was always going on about Florida, Florida, Florida. If she could get to Florida, it would be all right. The weather was good and there were lots of old people there and she could take care of them as a nurse. She would get her nursing license again. She would make a ton of money. She would get back on her feet and she wouldn't have to worry about the cold and the snow and the nosy neighbors and the bills and the loneliness because nobody cared about her. Nobody thought about her sitting in this crappy apartment with nothing and no one. As mad as I was at her, I could never say to her face, "You are never going to make it to Florida. Look at you. You are a wreck. You couldn't make it to the corner without hurting yourself, Ma." But I didn't. It didn't mean that I didn't think it every time she mentioned it. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really beautiful, Michelle. And we are going to move on to Joseph Pivato from Edmonton. Welcome, Joseph.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to be reading a short story. It's 3 pages. It should only take 5 minutes. Okay. We are in the First World War when we're in Friuli, northern Italy. That's where it takes place. Okay. The title of the story is My Illegitimate Aunt. There was a loud knock at the door. It was late on a dark and rainy night. Angelina went to the door with her oil lantern. She opened it and she saw a tall soldier all wet and dirty with mud. She screamed and stepped back in fear. "Soy yo, soy me," he said, "Mondo." She looked shocked. "Yo soy me," he said. "Mondo," he repeated. The voice in Friulano was familiar, but the dark figure was strange. Her father-in-law came running to the door with his shotgun. His hunting dog started barking. "Yo soy Mondo," he repeated and stepped inside out of the rain. Yes, it was her husband Mondo, but she had never seen him like this before. He had been off fighting in the front at the Isonzo River for months. Many men were dying in the war. She was happy to see him home. He took off his wet uniform to dry in front of the fire. They gave him some hot food. He explained that he could not stay home, but must go back to his division early the next morning. If they found him at home, he could be considered a deserter and shot. Mondo explained that the ruthless General Cadorna had executed 600 men in the front to impose strict discipline. Mondo was now part of the retreat of Caporetto, and the family must never tell that he had come home on the night of November 1917. He told them he saw men die from the poison gas that the Germans had sent down the mountainside. This was the Battle of Caporetto, and German soldiers had joined the Austrians and Hungarians and driven the Italians back to the Tagliamento River. The Italian retreat was often confused. The soldiers hurrying down country roads in the dark and the fog got lost. Soldiers, if anyone asked him on the road where he was going, he said he was lost and trying to join his division going to the Tagliamento. The family must never tell anyone that he had come home that night of November 1917. After Mondo had married Angelina in 1913, he moved in with his family in the new house that Sabuco brothers had built just outside the village of Nogaredo. They had built it with money from Canada. Then he returned to Canada to work as a stonemason. When the war broke out in 1914, migrant workers all over the British Commonwealth were encouraged to return to their home countries to enlist as soldiers for the front. A train traveled across Canada collecting Italian volunteers. On the side of the train cars, they had written in Italian, "Andiamo a fare la guerra." Everybody expected it to be an adventure for a few months. Instead, after a short few weeks of training, these Italians were sent to the front to fight Austrians and Hungarian soldiers for years. Early the next morning, before light, Mondo left the house and joined soldiers going west towards the Tagliamento River. As it turned out, by the time he got there, they were told that the Italian generals had decided to move further west to the Piave River and create a new front against the advancing Central Powers, who now occupied all of Friuli. Later, the Italians mounted an attack at the Battle of Vittorio Veneto and drove the Austrians back. By advancing so quickly into Italy, the Austrians had overextended their supply lines and ran out of food and munitions. They could no longer keep back the attack. The war in Italy continued until November 1918. 9 months after the retreat of Caporetto, my grandmother Angelina gave birth to a baby girl on July 1918. In December, the Italian soldiers were discharged and were able to return home to their families. When my grandfather Mondo came home, he found a new daughter, a little girl with red hair. He was happy to be home, safe and alive, after seeing so many dead soldiers during 4 years of war. But the people in the village began to whisper about the birth of the baby with the red hair. There was nobody in the family with red hair. My grandmother Angelina had been unfaithful. Her husband had been off to war all those years. How could she have a baby? There must have been another man. But Mondo remembered that he had been there on that stormy night, and the family kept a secret of November 15th, 1917. That is the true story of my illegitimate aunt, my mother's oldest sister, Zia Dima, who came to Canada in 1957 and outlived all her older brothers and sisters and died in 1913 at age 95. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Joseph. That was excellent. Now I call Caterina Edwards from Edmonton. Welcome.
I'm going to do something I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to read an old piece in Italian, and I'm doing it because the book is coming out in at the mid-March, and the ebook is coming out in Italian I think the 10th of March. It's already up on Amazon.it, so if anyone's interested. It's from, I think some of you will recognize the story, but of course, since it is translated and I wasn't the main translator, it's kind of my words, but also Sabrina Rega who was in Bari, who translated it, and also Julia De Gasperi, that some of you know, who was in North Carolina. So we called ourselves a squadra, and we worked together and had tremendous discussions over words. So I apologize for my accent, and I'll probably mispronounce words, but those of you who know me know that I mispronounce words in English too. So. Non diventerai mai donna. Mia madre stava perdendo la testa e ero io a pagarne le conseguenze. Per anni
Quando aveva il pieno controllo delle sue facoltà, pensai che fosse malata di mente. Ora che era stata, per così dire, certificata, non riuscivo ad accettare la situazione. Soprattutto durante la mia adolescenza ero sicura che nessuno fosse oppresso come me. Anche alcuni dei miei amici stavano conducendo guerre di indipendenza contro i loro genitori, ma io non prendevo nemmeno in considerazione le loro battaglie. Le regole imposte da mia madre non avevano senso. Niente rossetto, niente appuntamenti, niente vestiti alla moda, niente sport, ti fanno male, niente lezioni di balletto, niente baldorie, casa dopo scuola, niente amici cattivi, no, 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 nessuna vita, pensavo. Tanto vale essere morta, mi dicevo, è pazza, pensavo. Mi insegnò a inamidare le tovaglie di lino, a stirare le lenzuola, a lucidare l'argento e sebbene fossi impedita a ricamare. Mi comprò un baule per il corredo che si aspettava, sognava che avremmo riempito di vetro, di murano, lenzuole e stoffe che avevo ricamato. Mi diceva di non mettere mai un cappello sul letto, di non aprire un ombrello in casa, di non mangiare mai carne il venerdì, di non mettere mai il piatto per il pane sulla destra, lì va il bicchiere da vino. E ancora, mi diceva di non uscire mai senza un giubbotto, di non lasciare mai che un uomo mi toccasse finché non mi fosse sposata, perché vogliono tutti una casa sola. Mi diceva di non bere mai il succo freddo del frigorifero, di non andare mai a letto con i capelli umidi, di non lavarmi mai i capelli mentre avevo il ciclo. Ogni regola era di uguale peso e importanza. Insistivo sinceramente che nessuna delle altre ragazze doveva seguire tali regole. Janice, dicevo, si fa la doccia durante il ciclo e non succede nulla. È più sana di me. La mamma scuoteva cupamente la testa. Fino a ora diceva, aggiungendo la sua domanda retorica preferita, se tutte le altre ragazze si getteressero nel canale, lo faresti anche tu, vero? Nel canale. Quello avrebbe dovuto farmi riflettere ogni volta. Il quadro di riferimento di mamma era Venezia negli anni 20 e 30, il periodo in cui era cresciuta, ma allora continuai a giudicare le regole come irrazionali, esempi della visione delirante del mondo di mamma. So then I talk a bit about the canottiera, but I'll skip that part. And also how eventually through going to Italy, I understood that my mother's delusions were the myths of the country. So, le canottiere, per esempio, erano quasi universali e le bevande fredde da non pensarci nemmeno. I pericoli erano troppo grandi. Capì anche che la donna che voleva che fossi non era solo una sua particolare fantasia. Trovai il prototipo nei romanzi del XIX secolo, la signora modesta, protetta e abile, che sapeva come vestire una famiglia, che sapeva comandare i domestici, che poteva intrattenere gli ospiti della cena con un giro al pianoforte, che poteva scambiare argute conversazioni con la testa piegata divinamente su un anello di ricamo. Una signora soddisfatta di svolgere il suo dovere con il marito, i figli e i genitori anziani. So now I'm gonna jump to the very last bit, so I'm almost done. So I talk about a song that was sung in an opera, anyway, and it was called Le Faccende di Casa Sbrigar. La frase suggerisce non solo la capacità femminile necessarie, ma anche il modo in cui devono essere impiegate. Sbrigar, lavorare rapidamente senza dilettarsi. Quante volte me lo sono sentito dire, sbrigati, muoviti, perché la rapidità faceva parte dell'essenza della madre che io ricordo. Veloce, competente, efficiente, puliva, cucinava e scatolava un turbine. Durante il fine settimana lei intratteneva cena per 12 in un paio di ore. Nei giorni feriali puliva le case e quando ero al liceo gli uffici degli altri dopo aver lustrato la sua. Nessun disordine, nessuna polvere o sporchizia o trascuratezza potevano resisterle. Ora, al contrario, resisteva al movimento. Sono stanca, diceva, lasciami in pace. So one last thing, it's calling Riscoprendo mia madre in Italian, not finding Rosa. So. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you. That was nice, Katherine. We're gonna pause for an announcement here. Over to you, Annalisa.
Thank you, Caterina, for this excellent reading. I greatly enjoyed. I think many recognize the traits of Italian mothers. I definitely did. Thanks to all our readers. There are many words of appreciation in the chat. Please keep using the chat for give your comments. And some announcement now. Weekly Shop Up and Write on Thursday from 10 to 12:30 and all are welcome to join a community of writers hosted by Annalisa Panati, me, and Alice Canton. Then the association offers a monthly 4 chiacchiere, 4 chiacchiere in Italiano, a chance to speak Italian with native speaker that is hosted by Maria Spadafora and Rosaria Moretti-Lori. Next session will be on March 3rd at 1:30 EST time. You're also invited to the premiere of the documentary Creative Space Queer and Italian Canadian this is on March 3rd at 3 p.m. EST. Please write to info@AICWCA if you like to attend any of this event, and mark your calendars. Our next open mic will be on March 19th. So back to you, Maria.
Let's go back to our reader. We are going to listen to Carmelinda Scian.
This is a braided essay that was inspired when I was in Lisbon, where I met Licia at the short story conference in 2018. This essay has just been published in the Hong Kong Review. River crossings. I stand at the mouth of the Tejo, the vast Atlantic lost beyond the dull horizon, the bustling city behind me. Car horns, guitars, drums, chatter fill the air. It begins to drizzle. A sudden gust of wind ruffles the wide, restless river. Out of the mist, a chrysalis of gray river and overcast sky, a skinny girl, brown eyes open wide, emerges, mollusks on her hair. She beckons me, skeleton arm reaching. I see her tears. They meld with the raindrops, the river, the mist. I wipe my eyes. Gulls cry angrily above my head, deafening, disarming, haunting. For whom are they crying? I have no umbrella, but I remain fixed on the drama only I can see. A massive white screen has been erected next to the equestrian statue of King Joseph I in the monumental square facing the river. This is where the king's residence used to be before the devastation of 1755. The king's statue celebrates the rebuilding of the city after the earthquake. This screen too must be a celebration. Then I remember the 2018 World Cup, Portugal versus Uruguay. Later today, Cristiano Ronaldo comes to mind, our modern hero. Other names follow, those who navigated these waters long ago. Vasco da Gama, Álvares Cabral, Magalhães, who set out in discovery of sea routes, lands, spices, riches, power. Later, fishermen followed. They salted cod on the shores of Newfoundland. Their faces and names are not known, not remembered or recorded, but they opened the doors to future immigrants, men and women ready to confront the unknown, begin anew. The Newfoundland, on the other side of these turbulent waters, where I have lived, trying to forget the very land I'm standing on. Oh, yes, yes, trying to forget a childhood spilling over with brutality, masqueraded as love, from a mother whose insanity was never diagnosed. Never, never. It wasn't she who had the problem. 4 decades spent at the smithy of life trying to cobble a new me. Yet, you stand on the upper deck of the ferry boat crossing the Tejo from Montijo to Lisboa. The wide river is tempestuous on this gray, chilly November morning. The waters are angry. It'll take an hour to cross. You shiver, pull your green woolen scarf tighter around your neck. You look behind you. There's no one. Good. You want to be alone on this long-awaited farewell, this departure from everything you've known up to now. You glance back at Montijo, the bull ring in the distance, the black mountains of garbage at the river's entrance, Lisbonites sending their refuse across on barges. In summer, stanchion flies undo good intentions. The black mountains of garbage darken the sky like monolithic guards at the Stygian passage to a subterranean kingdom. Behind Montijo lies Afonsoeiro, where you lived. That ad hoc built town of unpaved streets, stray cats and dogs, whores, drunkards, beggars, gossip, the lingering terror of Salazar's regime, the sweaty hands of your grandfather's gray, greasy-haired tenant next door on those parts of your body that made you feel ashamed when you were only 8. You never told anyone. Left behind the swells vomited by the ferry too is the dread of your mother's anger, her beatings, the savagery of her exactitude. You were always deficient. But you're turning 15 next month. Soon you'll be too old to be beaten into submission. Behind too are the shameful pea spots under the beds, the manure pile of shit and foodstuff at the back of the garden, and Manuel, the bug-toothed idiot your mother chose as your boyfriend. He's in the ferry's bar at this moment, drinking coffee with her, planning your future. Soon, he'll be left standing at Lisbon's airport with you waving goodbye. You've imagined this scene 1,000 times.
Thank you, Carmelinta. Thank you so much for this reading. And now, the next reader will be Delia De Santis, writer from Sarnia. Welcome, Delia.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone present and everyone behind the scenes. I'm going to read a very short story that I wrote last week. It's called All in Good Time. The widow Maddalena had lived next door to Carletto for 45 years. No one called him Carlo. Since childhood, the name had remained diminutive. Maybe because while his body had grown as it should, his hands had stayed unusually small. There was nothing delicate about him except his pretty little hands that made people smile during handshakes. But considering that, he really wasn't a bad-looking man, darkish of skin, a Sicilian with African hair that now was all a nice white. But he was the most annoying person Maddalena had ever known. And everyone in the town with a small Italian community felt as she did. Carletto annoyed the people at the Italian club, at the bowling alley, and at the bocce court. In the grocery store, if people saw him coming, they turned their cart the opposite direction instantly. But he did have a redeeming quality. He was the very best welder in the local boilermakers union. Some people attributed it to his small little hands, for only Carletto could do important repairs in tight spots. He was in demand all the time, and he could work all the overtime hours he wanted. People wondered how much money he had squirreled away, and for what. He had no family. Maddalena wished she had that kind of money so that she could help out her married kids who were always wanting. How did the meeting at the club go the other night? Maddalena asked an acquaintance one day. How could it go? Shit disturber was there again. He never listens and then starts jabbering when the meeting is about to close. How can you stand living beside him? I would have sold the house long ago. I know, but I'm hardly ever there. I don't see him much. Maddalena managed a beauty parlor, and she always stayed at work late to close up. And sometimes she would even go shopping or visiting after, as she had no one waiting at home. Even her poor cat had died. Recently, Carletto had asked her if she was going to get another cat. She replied, no, no more, all done with cats. He asked her why. She quickly replied, so you won't be able to complain anymore. Well, what do you expect? Your fancy Romeo was always shitting in my lettuce. I always let my cat out after he had done his job in the kitty litter. Besides, you don't eat your lettuce. You give it to the stupid rabbit. You're too cheap to give that poor animal some real food. That's your opinion. I give my rabbit only natural food. Organic, if you want to know. Yeah, that's why he looks like he's been in a concentration camp. Know what, Maddalena, Carletto said? If I didn't like my house as much as I do, I'd sell it just to get away from you. I know a lot of women from the north of Italy, but none are as miserable and nasty as you. Oh, well, I'll help you make up your mind. I'll call the real estate agent for you. You do whatever you want, but don't forget that's my house. And he turned his back and left. But the next morning, there was a big for sale sign on her front yard. Maddalena was already late for work, but not late enough to go pull out the damn sign and take it down to her basement. And she muttered to herself, I hope they'll arrest him for stealing the bloody sign from whoever's front yard, the nerve of the man. But during the day, she did ponder on his words. It was the first time he had called her miserable and nasty. So maybe after all, she and Carletto weren't done with each other yet. There were still lots of things they needed to sort out. But all in good time. Yes, all in good time. since neither one of them was going anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was hilarious. So thank you, Delia. Next, we have Darlene Madott, who is from Toronto. Welcome.
Thank you to the Canada Council, the Writers Union, and AICW for facilitating this. I'm going to read excerpts from What to Do in Case of Hurricane. At the Paradise Resort, Jamaica, 10 years ago, I read instructions on the hotel flyer for what to do in case of hurricane. And I found them so interesting that I pilfered the brochure. I knew I would one day hang a story on the structure of the instructions. All you need to know to get these excerpts is that Jane Pierce is the head of nursing at the Halifax General Hospital, where she meets William Riley O'Grady, a Halifax slum landlord, when she stitches up his hand. They share a Catholic Children's Aid Society background of abandonment and abuse. Don't go out to look around. You will be of more help without interfering. Over the years, Will is very helpful, especially with young Benjamin. Not directly, but he helps. He comes to some of Ben's games when Jane can't, Will's hours of work being more flexible than Jane's. How did it go? Jane asks Benjamin after hockey, a game she couldn't make. Will yelled at me to get up off the ice. He said if I just lay there, I'd get a blade across my face. No matter how much it hurts, never give anyone the chance to attack while you're down. He's a good man, Will. I'm glad you found him, Ben concedes. I didn't like him at first, but he's growing on me. A good man. Their first Christmas after Jamaica, Will suggests they all go to midnight mass, like a family. Ben is excited to be able to stay up late. Jane is excited too. She isn't sure why. Then there is the issue of communion. How can she take it with she and Will living in sin, though separate and apart? As far as Ben knows, they are just friends. Will tells Jane he has gone to mass earlier in the day, so he won't be taking communion twice, but he'll come up with them, take the blessing. Ben is first in the communion lineup, then Jane, then Will. Just as they reach the altar, in front of which stands the priest, Will pinches Jane in the butt, startling a laugh out of her. Midnight mass on Christmas Eve becomes a tradition whenever Jane doesn't have to work. When she does, Ben goes with Will. By the fifth Christmas, Ben is going house hopping with his own friends. After Mass is when Jane and Will always exchange gifts. Their fifth Christmas, Will's gift starts off with a Hallmark card. The card describes Jane as the love of my life. The big bag full of tissue paper contains a wrapped box, a smaller box inside that box, and a still smaller box inside that, a ring box. Jane looks at the box in the palm of her hand, thinking, oh no. Oh yes, oh no. Then Will goes down on one knee and looks level into her eyes and asks in a plaintive voice, aren't you going to open it? Finally, Jane opens the ring box and sees two little diamond earrings, and her whole body exhales. Will laughs, and Jane just smiles, wondering how much of herself she has betrayed. Everything apparently for Will to be laughing so. They both know that he won't ever ask now. Jane has given Will and he has received all the answer he will ever need to the unasked question, a moment's hesitation. Crawl in smoke. Jane never did, never crawled. There is a natural anesthetic that protects a person in the immediate aftershock of trauma. Months after the shock of Will's betrayal has begun to wear off and a real suffering set in, not even then does she crawl. Jane goes to a jeweler in downtown Halifax. Ephraim the jeweler recognizes her as the nurse who sometimes comes into his shop to have her watch repaired or a battery replaced. This is the first time Jane has come to sell Ephraim anything. What will you give me for these, Ephraim? Jane sits down with the jeweler on the customer side of his long glass display case. Ephraim sits behind the display case as if behind his desk. Ephraim looks through a small glass, now at the diamond earrings, now at her. While he tells her about his betrayal at the hands of his second Russian wife, the one who has taken him to the cleaners after cheating on him with a man with a square face. So he was handsome. So nobody loves a man with a round face. But I was good to her. Women don't love good men. They all want the handsome bad boys. Ephraim is in no hurry. Jane listens to Ephraim's story of betrayal, and as Jane sits there with Ephraim's little dog on her lap, taking deeply into herself the stupid animal comfort of Ephraim's dog, the puppy falls asleep. How she had loved it when Will curled around her in sleep to feel his breath against her neck, the animal comfort of his chest rising and falling, the tenderness being what she misses the most. Jane asks Ephraim, only half in jest, what will you take for the dog? It's not for sale. I love that animal. Finally, Ephraim stops looking through his small glass. He takes out a single $100 bill and puts it on the display case. Ephraim of the round face looks directly into Jane's eyes. The man who gave you these diamonds didn't love you. Promise me you'll fall in love with me. Darling, I have loved you all my life. We go through life with the notion that the person who sleeps in bed beside us is someone we know. The dreams so seeming real, we think that other person must be dreaming them too. So if Jane became the mother her Will had to abandon in the end, the miracle was that they'd ever found each other in the first place. Jane, her little boy, with the imperfect space between his teeth. Will, his Jane, whose monster had lifted another little boy from his crib. They kissed each other's wounds for over a decade. They had that miracle for all those years when there might have been none. Like the miracle that found Will in a locked car hidden under a tree, like the miracle that propelled Jane to take to the street in pajamas and socked feet, against all odds, against all the rules for what to do in case of hurricane.
Thank you, Darlene. Thank you, that was really beautiful. We are going to move to our last reader for the evening, Marisa De Franceschi from Windsor. Welcome, Marisa.
Thank you very much. It's been wonderful to hear all of the writers reading. I just have a few little things to read here. The first one is called Wild Strawberries. We made love once on a patch of wild strawberries. I lay myself down for you in a bush out in the county almost 5 decades ago. I wanted you to touch me, hold me, kiss me. You helped me up, and we laughed. The wild strawberries had stained my white blouse. I still want you to touch me, hold me, kiss me. We must go out in the county. We must find that bush and that patch of wild strawberries. Only now we will bring along a blanket. These are unpublished random thoughts. The second one is called Satan. I used to teach at St. Clair College, and this is called Satan. My ESL students tell me Satan lies beneath a woman's fingernails. They need to be cut short and kept clean. No fertile sliver for the devil to implant himself in any crevice. What will they come up with next to scare the bejeebies out of me? I wonder, does Satan lie dormant under a man's fingernails too? The toad in my garden. I see the toad in my flower garden. It startles me as I have startled it. What a strange looking creature it is. I bet he thinks the same of me. This one is called the old oven. The recipe says to turn it on. Set it at 350 degrees, give it time to reach that temperature. Prepare the cake, grease it well, that's important. Otherwise, it won't slip out easily. No matter what I do, the damn thing falls right before my eyes. I just stand there like a dummy and watch it shrink and finally settle down where I don't want it to be. I read on the internet, cakes fall for various reasons. The oven is too hot. Turn it down a bit, it says. You've mixed the batter too hard. Use your handheld wooden spoon instead of the mixer. I follow all the instructions, but the cakes always fall. I return to the internet and read an interesting fact. Your oven may be too old. How about that one, I say to myself. I may be doing all the right things, but the damned oven is too old. Well, what can I say? Buy a new oven? No way. Mine has been working for 45 years. No, I will not get a new one. I'll make do with what I have, or I can just stop making this damn cake. That's it.
Thank you, Marisa. That
Thank
was lovely. There's so many comments in the chat, so I hope you check them out. I guess we have no question, so I'm going to thank you, anyone, for joining us today. This free event on Zoom was brought to you by the Association of Italian Canadian Writers, which is run by a group of volunteers. We welcome donation at any time. Please go to AICW.ca to donate and to find out more about our activities. And I'm going to turn off very quickly to Annalisa. Annalisa.
Non avevo attivato l'audio. Grazie a tutti per essere stati con noi, grazie ai lettori, grazie agli ascoltatori. A tutti buona serata o buonanotte a seconda di dove siete.